the year of 1925, Manjimup and its district was in a state of lawlessness and needed tough, no-nonsense law enforcement, and it was about to get it. For many, many months past, thieving and sly grog selling has been rife within the district, particularly in the Pemberton and Northcliffe area. And although the district had a police officer at Manjimup and also at Pemberton, it seemed that these lawbreakers could not be caught. Inspector Mitchell, please note that I have approved of the transfer of Constable W. Harvey, reg number 1303, from Perth to Manjimup, in charge, and see that the police quarters are made available for occupation immediately on his arrival. Commissioner of Police. So once again, the Harvey family would board a train in Perth and embark for their next destination in life. Sadly, what they could never envisage in their wildest nightmares were the tragedies and heartbreak that would lay before them. The tall timbers of the southwestern corner of Australia were unique, and the mostly cool climate would suit Margaret to a T, so at last she could leave behind the harsh life and times of the outback. In just a few short weeks, the family had travelled from the dry, dusty, never-ending horizons of the famed Never Never to the lush green pastures of the southwest of Western Australia. On their way south, they passed quaint little settlements nestled in a sea of green surroundings. This trip was no doubt exciting, and it must have felt like another world compared to you and me. Now, with a family of 4 young children and yet another on the way, Margaret was keen to settle into her new home in Manjimup. Manjimup was a great little town, but there was only one thing missing, and that was strong law and order enforcement. However, within weeks, that was all going to change. Before long, the new cop in town would become quite the celebrity. The majority of the area's population was generally made up of timber workers and the newly settled group settlers. The group settlement scheme was an interesting concept that in the long run would prove to be a total disaster for many families. Ready-made farms in Western Australia. Handbook of information for impending settlers. Their great colonising scheme. Absolute freehold, not leasehold. Ready-made farms, good rainfall, splendid markets, and assured living from the very start. Generous terms, 10% cash deposit and the balance in equal annual instalments extending over 20 years. So what could go wrong? Well, almost everything. In many cases, these so-called ready-made farms turned out to be areas covered in some of the highest trees in the world that needed to be cleared before any crops could be planted or any cattle could be run on the land. Many of the families who took up this offer after World War I were desperate for a new start, and very few had any farming experience at all. William's reputation had preceded him, as many of the men living in the southwest had heard of his reputation from their experiences in the Great War, so he was greeted with open arms by the general population. But there was work to be done, and within days most people knew that there was a new sheriff in town. After many inquiries, it was obvious that the illegal sale of alcohol was the first thing to be stopped. So that desperate problem was brought under control as soon as possible. The Commissioner of Police, Perth. Dear Sir, Re Constable Harvey, Manjimup. I am instructed by my board, which met in December last, to draw your attention to the good work, in the opinion of my board, which Constable Harvey is doing in the district. However, Constable Harvey has been here but a few short months and has done very credible work in such a short time. Particularly is this so when it is noted that he has had the care of the whole of the district which 2 constables were in charge of before. Dear Sir, with reference to your letter of the 6th instance, conveying the appreciation of your board of the efforts of Constable Harvey of Manjimup in connection with the illegal sale of liquor, I am very pleased to receive such communication, and it will be brought under the notice of the constable concerned. I have had under consideration for some time the question of sending a second man to Manjimup, but owing to the shortage of men, I have not been able to do so at present. It is expected, however, that a number of recruits will be available for duty within the next few weeks, when a second constable will be stationed at Manjimup until the new police station and quarters at Pemberton are erected. Yours faithfully, Commissioner of Police. That second policeman took a long time to arrive, so police work would continue 24 hours a day. Meanwhile, Margaret was close to the birth of her 5th child, and finally a beautiful little girl was born. This new addition to the family would be proudly named Madeline. Young Maddie would become a very popular little girl around the town site of Manjimup. She was renowned for her beauty and happiness, so the townsfolk loved her. In the early parts of 1927, a major change came to Manjimup. Electricity. The townspeople were ecstatic. With close on 60 consumers and 20 streetlights, the town had come alive, and Manjimup had joined the modern world, at last. William's day-to-day work was going along as per normal, with all sorts of troubles, good, bad and ugly. Of course, Margaret was once again pregnant and was due to give birth in the middle of 1928. In late July of that year, Margaret went into labour and the doctor was called to her home. It was a dark and thunderous night when the doctor arrived in his horse and sulky. The birth did not go well. The doctor could not get the baby out, so he resorted to the use of forceps on the baby's head. Sadly, the baby was stillborn with a crushed skull. Margaret would forever to her dying day blame the doctor for being drunk. The little boy was named Joseph and buried the following day. In those days, there was no time for mourning and work had to continue. The law enforcement of the area could not wait, so William was hard at it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was non-stop. As soon as she was able, Margaret was back up and at it. There were kids to look after, the house to be cleaned, prisoners fed, and all the chores of life in 1928. Time had quickly moved on, and in 1929 Margaret gave birth to her final child. This time the couple would name the latest child William Patrick Harvey. Soon after the birth of Patrick, young Madeline was admitted to the Warren Hospital, suffering with pneumonia, but recovered well. And then it happened.
That's for going higher, higher, higher. Invest. Put it away and forget about it. Buy, sell, speculate, buy on margin, hold for a rise, a 10-point rise, a 15-point rise. It's bound to go up. Clean up and buy more. Everything is going up. Up, up. The market crashes October 1929.
The year of 1930 was looking bleak. Could it get any worse? Well, for the Harvey family, perhaps. With the collapse of the world economy, some people lost their jobs, others lost their businesses, and even more were made destitute. For the group settlers, well, they had the souls ripped out of their very being. There was no way many of them could continue on, for they were at their wits' end and simply just had no choice but to up stakes and walk off the land, totally destroyed. Many people were hungry, so the townsfolk would send them to the police station where William and Margaret would provide them with a hot cooked meal. If the lockup was vacant, William would allow them to dosh down for the night. The townsfolk of Manjimup and the district would never forget the human kindness of William and Margaret. The time the family spent in Manjimup would become legendary to this very day. The working environment in the area was extremely tough and dangerous, with serious accidents seeming to occur every week. William was always busy. Not only accidents, but many traumatic deaths and critical injuries. The times were taking their toll, and many people could no longer cope, with some ending it all. After all the death and carnage that William had witnessed in his life, very little would surprise him as he approached middle age. On the afternoon of Thursday, the 27th of September 1930, another phone call came to the police station office. It was another urgent call. This time, an unknown child had been involved in an accident at the railway marshalling yards. Constable Harvey was immediately summoned, and there was a poignant scene when he arrived and recognised the child as being his own. For William, that afternoon would be frozen in time. Seldom has a community been so profoundly shocked by a tragedy as Manjimup was. Madeline and her 10-year-old sister Ursula had been away playing with friends and were on their way home. Going through the station yard, Madge attempted to pass underneath a rake of trucks standing on the side near the goods shed, an engine attached to other trucks shunting in the yard. That shunting caused the wagons to move slightly. One wheel hit the little girl, killing her instantly. She was just 4 years old. My father would later tell of his vivid memories as he witnessed it unfold on that horror afternoon. The old man had tears welling up in his eyes as he cradled Madeline in his arms. He thanked the workers and proceeded to take his little girl home. Many of the townsfolk had lined the main street on that fateful day and witnessed the harrowing sight as the policeman walked the longest mile of his life. As can be imagined, Margaret became hysterical, as any mother would in such trying times. William carried little Maddie to her room, laying her on her bed. He then gathered her siblings around to say their last goodbyes to their little sister. The whole district were in utter shock at the news, and sympathy poured in from all corners immediately. But what could the shocked people say or do, apart from offering their help and deepest love to the family? The news of Madeline's fatal accident went Australia-wide, and sympathy poured in from all corners of the country. The pretty child was well known to many of the townspeople, while the parents' high characters of rich human sympathies have won the warmest regards and respect of all sections. The funeral, which took place on Friday, was the most impressive scene in Manjimup. In early 1932, 3 men of the criminal class were released from Fremantle Prison and immediately planned their next job. On Friday night, the 22nd of April, their first move was to steal a motorcar from the streets of Fremantle. They would then steal an oxyacetylene plant, from a barge moored underneath the Fremantle traffic bridge. After fitting false number plates to the vehicle, they would then await Saturday evening. As soon as day turned into night, they set off for Manjimup. On the way, they would pull over at a rail siding and steal a tarpaulin, then arrive in Manjimup around 2 o'clock the following morning. The night was cool, clear and quiet, with a full moon lighting the streets. The leader of the group of thugs was a young man named Martin Keane. After a time surveying the quiet streets of town, Keane jimmied open the front door of the Bank of New South Wales in the main street. His mates then drove the stolen vehicle to the laneway behind the bank. So far, all was going to plan, but little did they know they were being watched. For in the dark shadows, eyes were observing their every move. The local night watchman named George Starkey immediately ran to the police station to alert the local cop. Starkey knocked on the policeman's bedroom window to alert him about his observations. William took Starkey to the police office and gave him a .22 caliber revolver and picked up his personal .32 caliber, but then decided to take the station's .44. That decision would ultimately save his life. The two men rushed to the rear of the bank. Both men checked the stolen car. The cop then went to the front of the bank. Starkey covered the rear door. As the policeman was bending over listening to the clutter inside the bank through the keyhole, he instinctively turned around looking to the other side of the road, where he noticed the figure of a man hiding in the shade of a large pine tree. Suddenly, and without warning, the figure appeared in the moonlight and walked determinedly towards the cop. Bill walked towards the edge of the road, the .44 at his hip. In the bright moonlight, he could see that the man had his hat pulled down over his eyes. A mask covered his face. The cop called out, "Who are you?" He received no answer. "Police here, get him up." Then suddenly, and without warning, the criminal pulled a gun from his overcoat pocket and pointed it straight at the policeman. Within seconds of the gunman hitting the ground, 3 shots were fired from the rear of the bank. The policeman immediately called out, "Are you all right, George?" Then he ran to the rear of the bank. As soon as the crooks inside the bank heard the explosion of the .44, they immediately opened the bank's rear door to escape, only to find George firing through the window of the back door. Escape from the rear was impossible, so they ran to the front door. On opening it, they could see the coast was clear. They ran across the dirt road heading for the thick bush on the other side, in the process stepping over the dying body of their friend, proving once again that there was no honour amongst thieves. Knowing that Starkey was okay, the cop returned to the front of the bank, just as another shadow appeared on the road. "Who are you?" called the cop. "It's me, Bill Sprogg. Don't shoot." "Okay, Bill, give me a hand, will you?" Looking at the man on the ground, the cop pulled the handkerchief down from his face, but did not recognise who this man was. The policeman then asked Sprogg to pick up the revolver that was laying under the man's right hand and see if it had been fired. Checking the revolver, it was obvious that an attempt had been made to fire the weapon, as the hammer was half cocked. Keane had been cut down halfway through firing the weapon. William removed Keane's left hand from the pocket of his overcoat, revealing half a plug of gelignite ready for firing. Dr. Williams was immediately called to the scene. He would have Keane's dying body removed to the Jardee Hospital on the tray of a truck. The cop had fired the 44 from the hip, the bullet striking Keane above the left eye. Keane died in the hospital just 2 hours after being shot. This full moon, Main Street Wild West gunfight would be reported in newspapers Australia-wide for weeks and indeed months ahead. On inspection of the interior of the bank, a nasty reminder of the viciousness of Keane was discovered. For on the bed where the bank officer slept that night was a huge dent in the pillow, with a tire iron laying next to it. As luck would have it, the bank officer was away in Perth for the Anzac Day long weekend. Keane had discovered the bank's .38 revolver that would lead to his death on that fateful night. Rodder was found 2 days later hiding in a rail truck in Bridgetown by that town's local cop. Preston was discovered a short time later hiding in a rail shed in Fremantle. This whole sad episode had finished exactly where it had started just a few short days earlier.
Of course, I was always a sticky Vic with guns, you know. And he had this beautiful little .32 Colt revolver, 5-shot .32. Anyway, then there was the police service revolver, which was, I think, a .44, you know. And I can't recall whether it was American or English. Instead of having the ordinary butt, it had the rounded butt like a Smith & Wesson early model. That was on the hook up on the bloody wall, well out of reach, you know. And I'm pretty sure he said it was loaded. When he went into the office with this George Starkey, he gave Starkey a little .22 revolver. And he pulled out this .32 Colt and started to load it. He wasn't sure how good the ammunition was, you know. So he threw that aside and took the service pistol off the hook and went down. Anyway, that saved his life because that fired all right. And sometime afterwards, we were going down the back paddock to pick up a piece of special wood that he wanted for something or other. And he gets this little Colt out, and I thought, oh, this is weird, yeah. And took 2 bullets. We had a 5-acre paddock. A couple of dead trees left there with a scarf cut in them, you know. And he picked up this empty tin, jam tin or something, and sticks it in the scarf in this tree, and stood back, and went to fire a shot at it. Click, didn't fire. And he tried the second round, and that didn't fire. So anyway, we went back to the office. Of course, I was greatly disappointed. Got a couple of near rounds, and the next one fired. Put a hole right in the middle of the tin. Anyway, the story came out afterwards that he very near took this bloody thing down to the bank robbery. Would have cost him his life, you know. Yeah.
Manjimup Bank Tragedy. The Inquest. Verdict of justifiable homicide. Manjimup Bank Tragedy. Constable Harvey cleared. Coroner finds shooting justified. The coroner returned a verdict of justifiable homicide. The verdict was received by a crowded courtroom with applause by the spectators. Public desire to make presentation, Constable Harvey. Please approve. Manjimup Road Board. Recognition of good service, Constable Harvey and Night Watchman Starkey. Bank of New South Wales. We should be glad if you would permit Constable Harvey to accept the enclosed cheque for £10.
See, when young Madeline got killed, the old man had a cross made for a wooden Jarrah cross. stone jar with a name and that on it on the ghost hunt. Anyway, later on when they could afford a better, I don't know whether they had a marble cross or whatever, but he transferred the old wooden cross and had it re-embossed onto Martin Keen's grave. And it went in memory of Martin Keen, tragically killed, Manjimup on such a date, you know.
Whilst the whole district was celebrating, behind the scenes, William wanted out. I respectfully apply for the position of instructor, police school. I respectfully apply for the position of officer in charge of Bassendean Station. I respectfully apply for the position of officer in charge of Mount Hawthorn Station. I respectfully apply for the position of plainclothes constable at Perth Station. After the death of his two children and now the death of Martin Keen, it was obvious that he wanted out. However, it was not going to be easy. Submitted for your consideration, please. Although loath to lose the services of this constable from the district, still the memories of the recent bank robbery at Manjimup and the actions his duty compelled him to take on that occasion has, I think, prompted these repeated applications for change. So on it went, trauma after trauma, until 1935. Then he would hit the news again when career criminal Frederick Playford was spotted by William in a stolen car racing through Manjimup. He immediately took chase in a powerful Ford V8. After having travelled about a mile, Playford stopped, apparently unaware that he was being followed at the scene of an accident in which a petrol wagon had struck a tree and overturned. About half a mile further on, he came to a side turning and again stopped, probably in doubt as to which road to take. Constable Harvey, who was driving the pursuing car, pulled up in front of the car being driven by Playford. It is alleged that when the constable attempted to handcuff Playford, there was a struggle on the road, but with the assistance of his companion, Constable Harvey finally overpowered and handcuffed him. Playford was taken back to the police station. It soon transpired that Playford was a lifelong vicious criminal and he was quite prepared to kill to get his own way. Luckily, that never happened, but later in life it did come close. When apprehended by a young man, Playford would smash a tyre iron into the young man's head, then attack a young woman with that same tyre iron. Later in life, Playford would once again look eye to eye with the cop who just arrested him. Finally, and at long last in June of 1935, please note that I have approved of the transfer of Constable Harvey, reg number 1303, from Manjimup to the Central Police Station, Perth, as plainclothes constable. William and Margaret were over the moon, not so the population of Manjimup and the surrounding district, for they had become friendly and loving towards the family. A local court farewell. Tributes to the work of Constable Harvey. Constable and Mrs. Harvey farewelled. Wonderful public tribute. As a remarkable demonstration of goodwill, the public farewell to Constable Harvey and Mrs. Harvey in Manjimup Hall on Friday evening last was unique in the district's history. It was a personal triumph for one who was more than merely popular, for Constable Harvey's many fine qualities commanded respect, while he will be remembered affectionately for many unobtrusive kindnesses to those most in need of help. Shrewd enough to waste no pity on the callous wrongdoer, he had a deep and practical sympathy for human suffering, whether mental or physical, a feeling shared by his wife to the fullest extent. He is known throughout the state as an able and resourceful officer. No other man in the district has won so great a measure of respect and admiration as this keenly efficient, warm-hearted, friendly, good-humoured police officer. Many would state that never had there been, nor would there ever be, another Bill Harvey in the district, Such was his reputation. His cheerful character combined with his happy nature had indeed been noticed by many others, now in a different time. For now it was time to say goodbye Manjimup and hello Perth. You may not have known Bill Harvey when he came to town, but you sure wouldn't forget him after he left. End of part 2. Next in part 3. Where would they make a home? Would William settle in and just become another anonymous cop? Well, no, he would not. The journey continues and his reputation evolves into somewhat of a legend.